It's really an honor to be here. My name is Dave Boucha. Dave Giles is on this list here as well, but he has nothing to do with the talk today, so don't blame him. He offered to help, but didn't end up doing much. So anyway, I'm Utah Dave on IRC and Utah_Dave on Twitter. There's a real estate guy here in Utah that's Utah Dave on Twitter. So he gets mad if people tag him in their tweets. He's like, why are you using my name? So, anyway, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about SaltStack for intelligent configuration drift remediation and security. You can tell our marketing team got a hold of my title. So configuration drift. Oh, this is not going to work now. Wait, actually. Okay. Configuration drift, broken. So I actually hadn't used or heard of the term configuration drift until I started working at Salt and started getting people coming from other tools. They're talking about configuration drift and you gotta fix configuration drift. And I'm, what do you mean by configuration drift? And they're like, oh yeah, when things are, your server's not configured how you meant it to be. And I'm like, why would it ever be configured like it was meant to be? I just thought it was really odd. And so I was sitting in an IRC channel with a customer, and they were kind of introducing me to their deploy process. And so I was just kind of like watching. It was a distributed team. And so their tool would, every 30 minutes, would apply everything. And I was like, okay, so I'm sitting here kind of watching this thing, and so they're like, okay, we got these changes, we've already been testing them, and they're ready to merge in. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. Okay, 1 minute left. Okay, merge it now. Okay, and they merged it. And then it went, and their tool, applied their changes everywhere, and then, okay, that step was good. Okay, now for the next step. And they're like going over here, and they're double checking that the tests had completed, and it was like this, like 3 or 4, rounds in a row, like every 30 minutes, waiting for their tool to go out and deploy their stuff. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. And I think configuration drift is ridiculous. If you have configuration drift, you have problems. You have technical problems, and you have process and people problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those today. So originally, this talk was extremely technical, and it had a ton of examples and things. But as I was going along, I realized that a big chunk of this is people and a process issue. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about those rather than the technical. So we'll describe some of the technical solutions to these people and process problems. And then also, as we're going along, I'd love to hear any ideas that you may have. So I know all of you, or most of you, have run into similar situations, and I'd like to hear anything that you may have done to kind of solve these problems. So if you have configuration drift, I've kind of found these are sort of the 3 main things that cause this. And this is also a situation where I'd like to hear ideas. So first one is your system was compromised. A nefarious actor has compromised your server and has modified your configurations. So that's like worst case scenario in that instance. 2, your developers. You got developers or somebody other sysadmin who's logging in to production systems and changing things on the fly and not telling anybody else. Has anybody had that problem before? Some person that just will not stop fiddling, and they always have a good excuse, right? So that's another one. And then also, one that can kind of sneak up on you is vestigial artifacts. And by that, I mean, maybe you were managing something in the past and you still have that same pet server that you've upgraded, and now you no longer are managing something, but it's, Redis is still running for some reason. And you're not using it anymore, but it's there, and it's kind of like forgotten. So what other scenarios have you guys run into, or girls, that get configuration drift? Custom scripts that stop working. Very good. Any others? Uh-huh. So your configuration manager is broken, and you have no monitoring or reporting that's telling you that. Yep. One just popped in my mind that I remember, some random cron job that someone set a year ago and they forgot about, and it's still running, doing something, and you're like, what the heck is doing this? Why is this changing? So you go over here first, then we'll come over. Sysadmins who have no idea what they're doing? Nobody has someone like that on your team, do you? Yeah. Yeah. So the first one is the cron jobs that are running as a separate user, so when you log in as root, you don't see them. And then the other one was you're testing something out, and you leave it not completed, and then someone comes along and fixes it and blows things up because it shouldn't have happened in the first place.
I worked here 2 years ago, and I'm still causing outages problem.
Awesome.
Got rid of the problem, but it's still here.
Yeah. So something people did years ago can still cause issues. So I guess the cron jobs is kind of a vestigial artifact that's it's around. And there's some solutions around that. So I'm going to go through and kind of talk about some of the interpersonal things for these and some solutions to that, and also some technical things that Salt can help you with those things. So. You thought working with computers, you wouldn't have to be nice to anybody. Wrong. So like I was saying, a lot of these problems, kind of the root cause is your teams. And there might be some interpersonal issues that cause a lack of communication and a lack of coordination. It could also be from above. You might have orders from your boss's boss's boss that you're going to allow them to do this, and you're out of luck. So the first topic on the list here was your system was compromised. So as your systems architect, systems administrator, some places they tend to have a situation where the developers toss you some code, and then you're like, deploy this and run it, and they don't care about anything else. It's really important to, even if that's not official, it's really important for you to build relationships with your developers and work together with them on that. I know at Lyft.com it's a big thing. The developers, if I'm not mistaken, they work through the whole process of the development and making sure it's running in production correctly. So as the expert system administrator or systems architect, it's really important you work hand in hand as they develop their systems, their applications, that from the beginning, security and proper architecture is taken into account. So if you are following the development process and are involved in that and have input in that, you can often nip problems in the bud early on and avoid a situation where you have a Redis server wide open to the internet that's mission critical, various things like that. So get involved and in your entire development process here. It's your job. So you need to teach architecture, teach security, and work with your developers on these things. So who here has a situation where you just get code dumped at you and you have to deal with it? Does anybody? Trevor? It happens. Yeah. So as you do this, let's see what my next slide is. As you get involved with your developers, you can help build out best practices. So because you have a fantastic tool like Salt, you can provide default Salt states, provide automatic tooling so that the proper thing can be done to get started with. So you're not just tacking on security later on. You're not building out proper architecture and having to change things later early on. So you want to be involved, make sure that those things are done correctly, and that's your your salt states define the application and your architecture correctly. Same thing with security. So as far as some of the technical things you could do, Salt is a fantastic tool for analyzing the state of your system. There are some tools that you can use to verify that. So one, your Salt states will tell you if your config files and things that you're managing are in the correct state or not. So if you apply a state and you include the test equals true option, it'll come back and give you a diff and say, hey, you know, this one server has, you know, it's not correctly formatted. And then you can determine what's going on. But you might not manage every file in your SE directory, right? There's a lot of things on your system that you don't monitor. So there's some tools. Christopher Edwards from Adobe has done a lot of work in this arena. So there's a couple of modules, SaltStack modules he's written, particularly this file integrity monitoring that'll go and get hashes of all the files on your system and then keep a record of that. And so you can run that once a day, you know, whatever time period you want, and then get notified if there's changes on your system. So that way you don't have to have Salt managing everything, you know, on your system, the only things you care about, but you can determine if those files have changed in a very fast and quick way. There's also a runner in Salt called the survey runner that allows you to do those comparisons. So you can run a command such as cat config file across, you know, 5,000 hosts, and they'll come back and say, okay, you know, 4,999 hosts have this exact config file, but this one has a slightly different config file, and here it is. And so you can kind of get an idea of, you know, what things are not in the correct format. Same guy, Christopher, also started this project called Hubble Stack. Go to hubblestack.io, and it is a tool for doing similar things. Let me pull up. So hubblestack.io, it's a open source compliance tool. So there's a lot of modules to make sure your system is configured and is behaving as you expect it. And again, as you are building out your infrastructure, you can define these default states that will help your developers as they, you know, do testing, as they build out their infrastructure that they care about, and do it the proper way. So you can have your own SSH states and have them use the one you developed so that it complies with all of your security requirements. You know, firewall rules, various things like that. So it will allow you to make sure that those are all done in the proper way. It's also very flexible. So for example, say by default you want to disable root logins and require key-based SSH connections. It's very easy to have that become the default and use it everywhere. Maybe you have like one or two systems, but for whatever reason, some, you know, historical, you know, legacy tool that has to log in with a username and password, it has to be root. You can actually have the default salt state, but then have one that's only applied to that specific server that will use all the other configs, except for it'll modify the requirement to have the root user or the and allow password logins. So anyway, it's so it makes it really easy to do that. Okay, so the second thing you have a problem with is developers, right? There's always that one developer or a few developers that can't help but go in and fiddle with production systems. Again, how to win friends and influence people. let me collect my thought for a moment. Let me go back to this here. So, oh yeah, okay. So there might be valid reasons why a developer would need to log into a production system, and there can be just lazy reasons why a user would log into a production system. So for the lazy reasons why they should be logging into a production system, there's things you can do with Salt. You can just lock them out. We have people that'll shut down the SSH daemon and will not let them in at all. There's a variety of things you can do there. What would be a valid reason to log into a production system? Sure. Right, so you said to validate something the QA is seeing. So, right, there's always some class of problems that you kind of only see in production because of whether it's the load or the networking infrastructure or something you can't replicate in testing. There might be some valid reasons to do that. And so instead of just being the jerk that's like blocking, saying you can't log into the production systems, you can use Salt to provide a good, the proper tools so they don't need to do that, and also provide them ways to make sure that any changes they do make it back into your Salt states so that those changes happen. So in a perfect world, your entire infrastructure will be defined in your Salt states. So at any moment, say you have everything in Amazon and Amazon just dies, you could go over to Linode or Rackspace or Azure and spin up your infrastructure and be back up and running. You should be able to re-implement everything at any time for any reason. So if somebody, if a developer does need to modify something on a system, it should happen through Salt states. If you're using GitFS, you have all your configs in Git or in some other config file management system. That's where you want that to go. And why is that? For the obvious reasons that it can be tested, makes it easier for people to approve changes, make sure they're double checked, and go through a whole testing system. And so that you can replicate that. Now, if you do have a reason to log in and do something on production, there's a few things you can do to make sure that those changes end up back in Salt. So first of all, if you have a lot of servers, I highly recommend using, tagging a few of those as canary servers. So they log into a couple specific servers that you would expect them to log into. And then this is where you need to have discipline and make sure that they keep track of any changes they make. So that way those changes can be put back into Git or wherever you're keeping your Salt states so they get deployed correctly. You can also use Salt to verify that he or she told you the truth. So after they modify that config, if it's something you're managing in Salt, you can do a file that managed on a test with the test equals true and get a diff back and verify that those changes there. What you don't want to do is have somebody log in, do a valid fix that's necessary, but then have that get lost, and then the next time you have to rebuild that server or something gets reset, then you lose that knowledge and that fix. So you need to be disciplined, make sure that those changes make it back into your Salt states. Again, SSH policy. Personally, I like to make sure that people just can't log into your production servers, unless it's like an emergency. So, for example, like repo.saltstack.com, you can't log into them. We have to actually go and enable users to log in to do testing. But we've never actually had to have them log into those because everything's managed through Salt, tested through Salt, and because of that, whenever we make changes, and we can deploy those, and we get the same result every time, which is a really powerful thing. So again, test equals true. The survey runner are all different types of things you can do to make sure that those changes make it back into your system. Does anybody have any ideas in addition to that they would recommend in a situation like that? Yeah. That's a great example. So his suggestion was have a system set up so they can have a temporary access to that system and have everything that happens logged on that system, so you can make sure that you know exactly what was changed and who accessed it and when, and have an expiry on that. So you know, okay, you got an hour or 2 hours or a day or whatever is necessary for that. Great idea. Thanks, Trevor.
And if they need access, we scan WTemp. If we see that logout has been instigated, we would immediately go to that individual and ask if, I thought my keys were there. Your keys are there. Like, can we help you with, or what are you going to perform? We get immediate notification when they do.
That's awesome. So Trevor's saying he has all their logs sent off to syslog to an external service, so they can actually check all the logs and verify things there. And I'm shortening this quite a bit, but and then allow them to so have it in there. So when they log in, SSH automatically logs them right back out. So they they have a user on the system, but they can't actually do anything. Yeah. In fact, the demo last year, I had that set up. So we had the Salt beacon set up so that every time someone logged in, it would actually text me with the username and the timestamp of who logged in. So that way you always know what's going on. So there's a lot of things like that.
So there's a couple of things. One thing is controlling the configuration of your local machine profiles and accounts with state, right? So you're always controlling based upon that standard and reverting to that standard. So if somebody gets a bright idea to add in another ID, you just pull it off, right? And enforce that. And then if you have a generic account, the way we've seen this, the way that I see it done most effectively is give access to that generic account for this set period of time, and after the set period of time, rotate the password. Right? So you check out the password for a period of 24 hours, and that's logged, and you're in control of that account for 24 hours. So at the end of the 24 hours, you recycle. And that works. It works on Linux and the second time.
Yeah.
Right?
Very good. Yeah. Yep. Very good. Thanks.
And the logs and all that, right? We have different constraints when we work than a lot of the companies who are sitting here, but that usually solves this problem. One of the problems that we have is the production data never matches what's in QA. There's a lot of instances where that contains PII data or really like chaos monkey stuff that the user's just trying to type in that isn't really fitting what you would expect. So having a rigorous and fast clone down process or technology where you can clone down certain sets of data and do that type of testing.
Right.
That's generally the case. Where something doesn't match in production, it's usually the data, and it's usually not data that we put in, it's usually data a user of the system has put in that we're not expecting. Like the last company I worked in, someone put a vehicle price in of $4.5 million on accident, and it said it's for negative, and they're going to overwrap the field, right? So you can't really figure that out unless you're doing a bunch of interesting chaos monkey testing.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah. So essentially, all these things are little bits of information tools to make sure that your salt states can reliably set up your system whenever you need to. I've seen too many places where somebody set up a server 2 years ago, she left, and so they just kind of keep cloning that VM over and over. No one knows really what's on there. People maybe have analyzed it. They don't even know if everything on there is needed. There might be superfluous systems on, running. That's just a dangerous place to be in because you're opening yourself up to one, not being able to replicate it, and you also might have things running that will open you up to being compromised. So it's really important to define those salt states. I ran into this actually in a previous job. I set up an asterisk server, and this was tied into all of our door security and various things. And I thought I had everything in my salt states, but I was missing some of the audio files that I had recorded for notifications and things, and a couple other small configurations. And then now they wanted to move that into like a better server because I had built that like on a small like desktop. And I thought everything was going to be perfect, but I had modified some of those config files and had some audio media files that didn't make it in, and so didn't come up and things didn't work. So again, make sure your salt states are the source of truth. Skip here. I think I'm missing a slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the vestigial artifacts again. I did mention that a little bit. So if we're going back to the pets versus cattle analogy, if you have your salt state set up correctly so you can reproduce them, if something's not working correctly, you just shoot that in the head, spin up a new VM to replace that, and you should be good. When you are in a situation maybe against your will where you have some pet servers that you have to baby and manage for years on end, it's important to watch what you change in your salt states. So if you have config files in a config.d directory of some type that you're managing, and then for whatever reason you don't need that config file anymore, you need to be aware of when you remove things so that you don't end up with some random config file sitting there. If you have cron jobs that you've set, if you don't need it anymore, you need to make sure that they're removed. Old users that you've set, make sure that they get removed. And that's something that Salt can help with, but it takes some discipline as a system administrator to make sure that you follow through on those things. Yeah. Great question. So the question was, how do you automate that removal? Because if you just take out a salt state, so say you're managing an Apache config file. If you remove your salt state, then that config file will just still sit there because salt's not going to do anything, right? So there's a couple things you can do there. If it's one particular file, you want to make sure it's removed. There's a file.removed state, and you give that path, and it'll make sure that file's gone. So that's one way for a particular file. If you have a directory of files you're managing, the file.recurse will push all those config files down, templatize them for you, and lay them down. And there's an option called force. It says force to true, and it'll make sure that directory exactly matches what you have on your salt master. So if you remove a file from that directory in your salt master, and it exists on your minion, it'll delete the things in there. So especially if it's something where you have multiple config files, I like using the file.recurse because then I can just basically mirror those things there. Otherwise, you do need to do like a remove, or like if you have packages you want to remove, say you take off MySQL and you go to Postgres, then you would want to have a state that would remove the MySQL packages and config files and things. So it's kind of a bit of a manual process. Correct. You have like a reverse state that would undo that, exactly. Did I see someone's hand over here? Okay. Oh, okay, yes, thank you. Yeah, so on the file.recurse, it's not force. Thank you for correcting me. It's clean. You set the option clean to true, and then that will clean it. Thank you. And that'll make sure that anything extra is in there. Maybe you have like some default Nginx configs that are, just get shipped by, the packager, and you don't want those. It's a good way to, wipe that out. Make sure you have a clean directory. So maybe you don't necessarily want to do it with your entire Etsy directory, but for the things that you care about, that's a good way to manage that. There's one more thing on the vestigial problem. Let's see. Okay, so again with salts, so a lot of times they'll look at a default config and they'll want to use like file.replace or file.comment to modify a line or comment out a line. And that's not a bad way to go. And sometimes it's something you have to do. But that can put you in a position where you don't absolutely know for sure everything that's in that config file. Maybe some default options changed. Maybe there was an error or something, and now your Salt's not finding the line that you're trying to do your regular expression on. So I generally recommend templating the entire file. So if you have like an Apache config or an Nginx config, to have that entire config file on your master. Use Jinja to swap out values for any of the options you need, and then push that whole file down. It's a lot less brittle, and you're much more sure of exactly what you're getting on your server. So that'll kind of avoid any situations where you think you're coming to something out, but you're not. So you say a really good practice is to use the, like for example, Nginx, to use the Nginx, the config.conf directory and manage all the files inside of there. It's a very good best practice. Makes it easy to keep things modular, and you get multiple files as well to just keep related config options together. True, yeah. Thank you. So again, I just want to go back. Honestly, if you have configuration drift, something is broken. Go look at the technical reasons why it might be broken, and go look at the interpersonal and process problems of why that might be broken. Any other question? Right. Those are some fantastic points. To summarize, if you couldn't quite hear, I think one problem is putting too much faith in your automation and kind of setting it, forgetting it, and then falling into a problem where you have bit rot, where maybe some service is not available, or certain versions aren't matching up correctly anymore. So you need to monitor, double check, test, make sure everything's working correctly. One thing I didn't have as part of this originally, but what you bring up, which I think is really important, is the importance of not depending upon external services or sources of software for your production. Obviously, you're going to get things, but recently we had the whole NPM problem where somebody removed some pieces of software and just things broke across the internet. Python packages, Salt packages. Repo.saltstack.com has not been down once since it's been out, but if you are deploying a big data center and suddenly it's suddenly not available, kind of screwed. In fact, a big user of Salt was deploying a data center in Hong Kong a couple years back, and they deployed half of it, did some testing. We cut a new release that night and introduced a bug that directly affected some of the stuff that they were doing. So they went the next day to do their other half of the data center, and it just completely failed, and it delayed the moving into production of that entire data center by a day because of a Salt bug that we released. So he came to me and was talking to me about it, and I was like, oh, you don't have your own internal repo? Like, they weren't expecting the upgrade, so make sure that everything you need to deploy your infrastructure is held internally, that you have control over, so you can make sure it's there. If you're depending on GitHub being up for your deploy to happen, you're going to set yourself up for some heartache when they go down, because we deal with that, because Salt uses GitHub, and they've gotten a lot more reliable, but there's times where suddenly we can't merge pull requests, and we can't do code, and so we're kind of like, okay, well, we can do stuff locally, but we can't do all the management stuff that we need to. So just be aware of that. Don't be stuck when GitHub's down or whatever service you're relying on is down. So again, I'm on IRC. I'm Utah Dave, and whenever I'm in town, I'm almost always in there. I'm Utah_Dave on Twitter, and you can also find me on the Salt users mailing list. So if you have any questions or you run into issues, please feel free to contact me through there. I know a lot of you already have, and probably don't even, there's times when I've run into people that I've known for a couple years and didn't recognize their face. So anyway, feel free to reach out to us. Our Salt's employees are very, very open and willing to help out and be of service. So again, thanks for all of your inputs and the comments and ideas you shared. I really appreciate that. And go ahead and end. Thank you.